great chamber of the Galactic Council had seen many things in its 10,000 years of existence. It had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. It had heard declarations of peace and treaties of friendship. It had echoed with the voices of 100 species arguing about trade routes and border disputes. But it had never known silence like this. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood at the central podium. She was a small woman by human standards, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the weight of difficult years. Around her, arranged in rising tiers that climbed toward a domed ceiling painted with stars, sat the representatives of 412 spacefaring civilizations. Every one of them was staring at her as if she had just announced the death of the universe itself. Perhaps in a way she had. "I will repeat myself," Yuki said, and her voice was steady even though her hands trembled slightly where they rested on the podium. "The United Human Territories hereby declare a state of war against the Vreth Dominion. This declaration is effective immediately. All Vreth vessels are ordered to withdraw from Morai space within 48 standard hours or face military action." The silence stretched on for another heartbeat. Then the chamber exploded into chaos. The Tarathi ambassador was the first to find his voice. His massive form rose from his seat, his forearms waving in distress. "This is madness," he bellowed. "Humanity does not wage war. You are the peacemakers. You are the bridge builders. This must be some kind of mistake." "There is no mistake," Yuki replied calmly. "But you have no military," shouted the Crescian delegate, her feathers ruffling with agitation. "You dismantled your war fleets 3 centuries ago. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows what we chose to show them," Yuki said. The Vreth ambassador was laughing. His serpentine body coiled around his speaking platform, and his forked tongue flickered with amusement. "Let them declare whatever they wish," he hissed to his aides, making no effort to keep his voice down. "What will they fight with? Diplomatic protests? Stern letters? The humans are a joke. They have been a joke since they crawled out of their little world and begged for admission to the galactic community." Yuki turned to look at him directly. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes made the Vreth ambassador's laughter fade. "I remember," she said quietly, "when my grandmother told me stories of old Earth. She told me about a time before we reached the stars, a time when humanity was young and afraid and angry. We fought each other then. We burned cities and poisoned lands and killed millions of our own kind over differences that seem meaningless now." The chamber had grown quiet again. Even the most agitated delegates had stopped their protests to listen. "When we finally reached the stars," Yuki continued, "we looked back at what we had done to ourselves and we felt shame. Deep, terrible shame. We swore an oath, not to any god or government, but to ourselves. We swore that we would never again wage aggressive war. We would be the ones who stopped wars, not started them. We would be the patient hand that guided others toward peace." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. "For 300 years we have kept that oath. We have mediated disputes between species who wanted to destroy each other. We have negotiated treaties that saved billions of lives. We have absorbed insults and provocations and attacks on our people without striking back, because we believed that peace was worth any price." The Vreth ambassador was no longer laughing. Something in Yuki's tone had finally penetrated his arrogance. "But there are some things," Yuki said, "that peace cannot excuse. There are some crimes that patience cannot forgive. The Morai are a gentle people. They cannot fight. They do not understand violence. And for 60 years, the Vreth Dominion has been systematically exterminating them." She touched a control on the podium, and the air above the central floor filled with holographic images. Bodies. Mass graves. Camps where Morai were worked to death or subjected to experiments too horrible to describe. The delegates looked away, many of them making sounds of distress. "We asked the council to intervene," Yuki said. 17 times. The council declined. Trade with the Vreth Dominion was too valuable. The political complications were too severe. There was always a reason to do nothing." She let the images fade. "So we will do something. Humanity will do what the council will not. We will stop the genocide. We will save the Morai. And if the Vreth Dominion wants to keep killing innocents, they will have to go through us to do it." The Vreth ambassador had recovered some of his composure. Pretty words, he said, but words cannot stop warships. You have none. Everyone knows you have none. Your colonies are undefended. Your people are soft. This war you speak of will last exactly as long as it takes our fleets to reach your pathetic worlds. Then send your fleets, Yuki said simply, and learn what humanity is truly capable of. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the chaos resumed, but she did not look back. In a quiet corner of the observation gallery, High Counselor Vareth of the Tarathi sat very still. He was old, older than most of his long-lived species, and he had seen things in his centuries of life that few others remembered. He had been a young diplomat when humanity first made contact with the Galactic Community. He remembered watching the archived footage of their history that they had shared so openly. The wars, the weapons, the mushroom clouds rising over cities. His aide leaned close. High Counselor, surely this is merely a gesture? The humans cannot actually intend to fight the Vreth. It would be suicide. Vareth did not answer immediately. He was remembering something else. A private conversation decades ago with a human diplomat who had drunk too much at a reception. The man had spoken of things that Vareth had dismissed as fantasy at the time. You don't understand, the human had said, his words slurred but his eyes sharp. We didn't give up violence because we're weak. We gave it up because we're terrifying. Because if we ever let ourselves off the leash again, really off the leash, we could burn the whole galaxy down. We chose peace because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Vareth had laughed politely and changed the subject. Now, watching the chaos in the chamber below, he felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. You misunderstand, he said to his aide. The humans have not committed suicide. The Vreth have. His aide stared at him in confusion. But High Counselor, the humans have no. They have been pacifists for 3 centuries, Vareth interrupted. A species that nearly destroyed itself through war chose to become peacemakers. Did you never wonder what that required? Did you never ask yourself what they had to lock away to become what they became? The aide had no answer. The humans have not been unable to fight, Vareth said slowly, as understanding crystallized in his ancient mind. They have been unwilling. There is a difference, a vast difference, and now they are willing again. He rose from his seat, his old joints protesting the movement. I need to contact my government, immediately. We need to position ourselves very carefully in the coming days. This war will reshape the galaxy. Surely you're exaggerating, High Counselor. They're just humans. Vareth turned to look at his aide, and something in his expression made the younger Tarathi take a step back. Have you ever read human history? Vareth asked. Real human history, not the sanitized version they teach in schools? No, High Counselor. Then you don't understand what you're saying. Just humans. That species climbed out of their gravity well by strapping themselves to controlled explosions. They split the atom and immediately used it to vaporize cities. They invented 100 ways to kill each other before they invented ways to feed everyone. They turned death into an industrial process. And then, and this is the part that should terrify you, they stopped. They looked at what they were capable of, and they chose to be better. He started walking toward the exit, and his aide hurried to follow. Any species can be violent, Vareth continued. Violence is easy. What the humans did was hard. They took all that capacity for destruction and they buried it. They channeled that energy into building instead of destroying, into healing instead of harming. They became the gentle diplomats the galaxy knows today through sheer force of will. And now? The aide asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Vareth paused at the doorway and looked back at the chaos in the chamber. The Vreth ambassador was making threats, his voice carrying over the noise. Various delegates were arguing about what action to take. No one seemed to grasp what was really happening. Now they've decided that being gentle isn't enough, Vareth said quietly. Now they've decided that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And the Vreth have no idea what they've awakened. He walked out without another word, leaving his aide standing alone, watching the shouting delegates below. Somewhere in the vastness of space, on a dozen human colony worlds, buried under mountains and hidden beneath oceans, things that had slept for 300 years were beginning to wake. Machines hummed to life. Reactors powered on. Manufacturing lines that had been maintained in secret began to move. Humanity had made a promise long ago, a promise to never wage aggressive war. They had kept that promise faithfully for 3 centuries. But this wasn't aggressive war. This was something else entirely. General Marcus Webb stood in the heart of a mountain on the colony world of New Geneva, watching resurrection happen in real time. The chamber around him was vast beyond imagining. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, carved from living rock by machines that had worked in secret for generations. And filling that space, rising on automated platforms that hummed with power, were the warships of the United Human Territories. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Sleek and angular, built with technologies that had advanced in hidden laboratories, while the galaxy believed humanity had forgotten how to fight. Their hulls gleamed with materials that existing galactic sensors could not properly identify. Their weapon systems were things of nightmare precision, and there were so many of them. "Status report," Marcus said quietly. His aide, Colonel Sarah Chen, consulted her datapad. "First Fleet is fully operational. Second and third fleets will be ready within 72 hours. The orbital defense platforms around all major colonies are coming online now. We're ahead of schedule." Marcus nodded slowly. He was a tall man in his 60s, his hair gone silver, his face weathered by decades of preparation for a day he had hoped would never come. His family had been soldiers going back to the founding of the colony. Not fighters. There had been nothing to fight, but keepers of knowledge, trainers, maintainers of readiness. "Have there been any security leaks?" he asked. "None that we've detected. The Vreth still believe we're defenseless." "Good. Let them keep believing that for as long as possible." He walked to a viewing platform that overlooked the main hangar bay. Below, thousands of personnel moved with practiced efficiency, pilots running to their ships, engineers performing final checks, soldiers loading equipment onto troop transports. It looked like chaos, but it was actually a dance choreographed by generations of quiet training. "You know," Marcus said, "my grandfather used to tell me about the day the colony founders sealed these chambers. It was right after they ratified the peace accords. The whole human race had agreed to give up war, and some people wanted to destroy everything, melt down the ships, delete the weapons designs, burn the tactical databases. They said it was the only way to be truly committed to peace." Sarah came to stand beside him. "What stopped them?" "My grandfather's generation, the people who remembered the old wars. They said that peace was a choice, not a condition, that you couldn't truly choose peace if you had no capacity for war. So they made a compromise. They would seal everything away, hide it so thoroughly that the galaxy would believe it didn't exist. But they would also preserve it, maintain it, improve it, just in case." He paused, watching a squadron of fighters being loaded onto a carrier. "For 300 years, my family and others like us have trained in secret, studied strategy and tactics that the rest of humanity forgot, kept these machines ready to fly. In every generation, we passed on the same message. Pray that you never have to use this, but be ready anyway." "And now we're using it," Sarah said. "Yes." Marcus's voice was heavy. "I spent my whole life hoping this day would never come, hoping my children and grandchildren would inherit this burden and pass it on to their children, generation after generation, without ever having to actually fight. I suppose I should feel vindicated. All those years of preparation are about to pay off." He shook his head. "I don't feel vindicated. I feel tired and sad and angry at a galaxy that forced us to remember how to be what we used to be." An alert chimed on Sarah's datapad. She checked it, and her expression tightened. "Sir, we've received the latest intelligence from Mirai Space." "Show me." She projected the report into the air between them. Marcus read it in silence, his jaw slowly clenching as he absorbed the contents. "New camps discovered, mass executions documented, estimates of Mirai casualties revised upward again." "How many?" he asked quietly. "Best estimate is 47 million dead since the genocide began. Another 12 million in camps. The Vreth are accelerating their operations. They must know we're coming, even if they don't believe we can fight." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were hard. "Get me a secure channel to Ambassador Tanaka. and prepare the first fleet for immediate deployment. Sir, the original timeline didn't account for the Vreth speeding up their killing. Every hour we wait is measured in Mirai lives. We move now. Far across the galaxy, on a refugee ship fleeing toward human space, a Mirai named Gentle Rain sat in a cargo hold packed with survivors of her species. She was small and delicate, her skin a soft blue that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as her emotions shifted. Large dark eyes stared at nothing while she processed what she was feeling. The Mirai were telepaths, not the aggressive, mind-reading kind that other species feared. They simply felt each other, emotions, sensations, the basic textures of existence. It was what made them such a peaceful people. It was impossible to harm someone when you could feel their pain as your own. It was also what made the genocide so unbearable. Every death echoed through the collective consciousness of the surviving Mirai. Every moment of terror and pain was felt by all of them. Gentle Rain carried the weight of millions of final moments in her mind, and it was crushing her. But there was something else now, something she hadn't felt before. She could sense the humans. Their minds were strange to her, chaotic and loud, full of conflicting emotions that seemed to war with each other constantly. But underneath all that noise, she could feel something else, something that made her bioluminescence pulse with confused hope. They were angry, furiously, righteously angry, but not at the Mirai, at the Vreth, at what the Vreth had done. And beneath the anger, there was something else, something she had never felt from any species before. Resolution, total, unshakable commitment to a course of action. The humans had made a decision, and they would follow it through no matter what it cost them. An elder Mirai named Soft Current moved through the cargo hold to sit beside her. His bioluminescence was dim with exhaustion and grief. "You feel them too," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Gentle Rain's voice was barely a whisper. "They're going to fight for us. They're going to kill for us. I can feel their preparation, their weapons coming alive, their soldiers making ready." She shuddered. How can they bear it? The violence in their minds, it's like a storm, like fire. How do they live with that inside them? Soft Current was quiet for a long moment. "I have studied humans for many years," he finally said. "When I was young, I thought they were simply damaged. A species warped by their violent past, pretending to be peaceful while hiding their true nature. But I was wrong." "Then what are they?" "They are gardeners." Soft Current's glow shifted to something almost like wonder. They took the violence in their souls and they chose to cultivate something else in its place: compassion, patience, a genuine desire to help others. The violence is still there. It never went away. But they built something beautiful on top of it. He looked at Gentle Rain with his large, sorrowful eyes. "Do you know why they're fighting for us? It's not because they hate the Vreth. It's not because they want to prove their power. It's because they look at us and they see what they tried so hard to become: peaceful, gentle, incapable of harm. And they cannot bear to watch that destroyed." "But they're going to kill," Gentle Rain said. "They're going to cause so much pain. I can feel it building in them. How is that helping us?" "Because sometimes," Soft Current said softly, "the only way to protect the garden is to pull out the weeds, even if it hurts. Even if you'd rather do anything else. The humans understand this. They don't want to fight. It tears at their souls. But they're doing it anyway because they've decided that our lives are worth their pain." In the depths of Vreth space, High Admiral Cresseth reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing unease. His species had built their empire on a simple principle: strength takes from weakness. For thousands of years, they had conquered and consumed, expanding their domain by preying on species that couldn't fight back. The Mirai were simply the latest in a long line of victims. The humans were supposed to be the same: soft, weak, diplomatic fools who had given up their teeth generations ago. So why were his scouts going silent? "Report!" he hissed at his intelligence officer. "High Admiral, we've lost contact with all 17 patrol vessels in the outer sectors. No distress signals, no combat telemetry. They simply stopped transmitting." "Malfunctions? 17 simultaneous malfunctions across 100 light-years of space?" The officer's scales shifted to an uneasy gray. Unlikely, High Admiral. Cresseth turned to look out the viewport of his flagship. The stars seemed peaceful, empty. The humans have no warships, he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. High Admiral, there is one more thing. The intelligence officer's voice was strained. Our deep space sensors have detected something emerging from human space. Many somethings, moving in formation. On screen, the display flickered to life, showing a distant sector of space, and there, moving with perfect precision, was a fleet. Not a few ships. Not a token force meant to make a statement. A fleet. Carriers and battleships and cruisers and destroyers. More vessels than Cresseth had ever seen in one place, all of them broadcasting human identification codes. That's not possible, he whispered. They have no... High Admiral. The sensor officer's voice cracked with fear. We're detecting weapon signatures, energy readings beyond anything in our database. They're ships. High Admiral, their ships are more advanced than anything we have. Cresseth stared at the screen as cold terror began to coil in his chest. 300 years. For 300 years, everyone had believed the humans were helpless, harmless, a species that had turned its back on violence and become soft. Now he understood the truth. They hadn't become soft. They had become patient. They had been waiting, preparing, advancing their technology in secret, waiting for a reason to unleash everything they had been holding back. And he had given them that reason. All fleets, he said, his voice barely steady, all fleets, prepare for combat, immediately. But even as he gave the order, he knew it would not be enough. The humans were coming, and they had 300 years of anger to express. The Battle of Vareth Prime lasted exactly 47 minutes. High Admiral Cresseth had assembled the largest Vreth fleet in history to defend their forward command post. 1,200 warships crewed by soldiers who had never known defeat, armed with weapons that had crushed a dozen species into submission. It was a force that should have been unstoppable. The humans sent 300 ships. Commander David Park watched from the bridge of the carrier Remembrance as the battle unfolded. His tactical display showed the Vreth fleet as a cloud of red dots, swarming toward the much smaller formation of blue that represented the human forces. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. In reality, it was something else entirely. First wave of Vreth missiles incoming, his weapons officer reported calmly. Time to impact, 30 seconds. Point defense standing by, David replied. Let them get close. The Vreth missiles were their pride. Fast, agile, loaded with warheads that could crack a planet's crust. They had never failed to destroy anything they targeted. Thousands of them screamed through space toward the human ships. And then the human point defense systems activated. It wasn't like anything the galaxy had seen before. The Vreth missiles didn't just explode. They ceased to exist. Invisible beams of energy swept through space, and everything they touched simply vanished. In the span of 3 seconds, the entire missile swarm was gone. On the Vreth flagship, High Admiral Cresseth stared at his display in disbelief. What did they... High Admiral, we don't have sensor data that can explain what just happened. The missiles are simply gone. Fire again! Everything we have! The Vreth fleet unleashed its full fury. Missiles by the tens of thousands. Energy beams that could slice through armor. Kinetic rounds accelerated to near-light speed. They poured destruction toward the human ships in quantities that should have overwhelmed any defense. The human ships didn't even move. They sat there calmly, while their defensive systems erased everything thrown at them. Not a single weapon reached a human hull. And then, with terrible precision, the human ships returned fire. Commander Park watched the red dots on his display begin to disappear. The human weapons didn't just damage Vreth ships. They killed them cleanly, precisely, one shot per target. Power systems failed, engines went dead, life support shut down. But the hulls remained intact, and the automated distress beacons activated to guide rescue teams. We're not destroying them, David said quietly to his first officer. We're disabling them. As ordered, Lieutenant Commander Yusuf replied, though I confess I don't understand why. These are the people who've been murdering the Mirai. Because the Vreth crews are soldiers following orders. Some of them are conscripts. Many of them have families waiting at home. David's voice was steady but tired. We're not here for revenge, Lieutenant Commander. We're here to stop a genocide. That requires defeating the Vreth military. It doesn't require killing everyone in uniform. With respect, sir, they wouldn't show us the same mercy. No, they wouldn't. That's the difference between us and them. Across the battlefield, the Vreth fleet was dying. Not literally, the actual casualty rate was remarkably low, but ship after ship went dark, drifting helplessly as human weapons surgically removed their ability to fight. Panic spread through the Vreth ranks as they realized they couldn't hurt the humans, couldn't escape the humans, could do nothing but watch their military might become a collection of floating coffins. High Admiral Cresseth stood frozen on his bridge as damage reports flooded in. Half his fleet was disabled, then 60%, then 70%. His weapons did nothing. His defenses meant nothing. His 1,000 years of military experience meant nothing. High Admiral, his communications officer said, voice shaking, the human flagship is hailing us. On screen. The display flickered and Cresseth found himself looking at a human face. A woman, middle-aged with tired eyes and gray-streaked hair. He recognized her from the intelligence files. General Rebecca Stone, commander of the First Fleet. High Admiral Cresseth, she said, and her voice was calm, almost gentle. Your fleet is combat ineffective. Continued resistance will only result in unnecessary casualties. I'm prepared to offer terms. Terms? Cresseth's voice cracked. You expect me to surrender? I expect you to recognize reality. Your ships cannot hurt us. Ours can kill you anytime we choose. The only reason your crew is still alive is because we decided not to kill them. She paused, letting that sink in. We're not here to exterminate the Vreth. We're here to stop the genocide of the Mirai. Surrender, cooperate with our investigation of war crimes, and your people will survive this war. Continue fighting. And, she shrugged, we don't want to kill you, but we will if you force us to. Cresseth's claws dug into the arms of his command chair. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to fight to the death, to take as many of these soft, peace-loving humans with him as possible. But looking at the display, looking at the effortless way they had dismantled his fleet, he realized something terrible. If he refused, he wouldn't take anyone with him. He would just die, along with his crew, accomplishing nothing. How? He whispered. How do you have this technology? You've been pacifists for 300 years. You don't even have military academies. General Stone's expression shifted slightly. Something old and sad moved behind her eyes. We never stopped learning, High Admiral. We just stopped using what we learned. We kept building, kept improving, kept preparing, hoping we'd never need any of it. Your people gave us a reason to need it. But why? Why develop weapons if you never intended to use them? Because peace is a choice, not a condition. A choice you have to be able to back up. She leaned forward slightly. We chose peace for 300 years because we remembered what war cost. We built these ships and trained these crews because we knew that someday, someone might force us to remember how to fight. And we genuinely hoped, that day would never come. Her voice hardened. You made it come, High Admiral. You and your Dominion. You looked at a gentle, harmless species, and you decided to exterminate them for profit. You killed 40 million thinking beings who couldn't fight back. And when we asked you to stop, you laughed at us. Cresseth said nothing. There was nothing to say. So yes, we have terms. Complete and unconditional surrender. Cooperation with war crimes, investigations. Withdrawal from all Mirai territory. Reparations to the survivors. And accountability. Personal, individual accountability. For everyone who participated in the genocide. You're asking us to hand over our own people for punishment. I'm asking you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong, that the people who ordered the camps and carried out the killings should face justice. Her voice was steady. The alternative is that we continue through your space, disabling every ship and installation until your entire Dominion is helpless. And then we impose those terms anyway, except with a lot more of your people dead. She let the silence stretch. You have 1 hour, High Admiral. Use it wisely. The screen went dark. Cresseth sat motionless for a long time. Around him, his bridge crew waited in terrified silence. Their mighty fleet floated dead in space, a monument to their arrogance and miscalculation. Finally, he spoke. Signal the Empress. Tell her. Tell her I recommend acceptance of the human terms. High Admiral. Do it. His voice was hollow. We've lost. The humans have 3 centuries of technological superiority, and they're barely trying. If we keep fighting, we'll be exterminated. If we surrender, he trailed off. The Empress will not agree to accountability, his second officer said carefully. She will not allow Vreth citizens to be judged by outsiders. Then the Empress can come here and fight them herself. Cresseth rose from his chair, feeling old in a way he never had before. I've spent my entire life believing that strength was the only truth, that the powerful take from the weak because that is the natural order. And now I've learned that I was wrong. He gestured at the display, where the human fleet waited calmly. Their weapons dark, their victory complete. The humans are stronger than us. They've always been stronger than us. The only difference is that they chose not to use that strength. They chose to be peaceful, to be diplomatic, to build bridges instead of burn them. He laughed bitterly. And we thought that made them weak. We thought they were prey. We were fools. The message went out. In the refugee ship far behind the lines, Gentle Rain felt the moment the Vreth High Admiral chose surrender. She felt his shame and his fear and his bitter recognition of the truth. And she felt something else too. Something from the human ships. Relief. The humans were relieved that they didn't have to kill. She shared this with Soft Current, who sat beside her in the crowded cargo hold. The old Mirai's bioluminescence pulsed with wonder. They truly don't want to fight, he murmured. Even now, even winning, they take no joy in it. They feel every death they cause. It wounds them. How can they bear it? Gentle Rain asked. How can they keep fighting if it hurts them so much? Soft Current was quiet for a long moment, feeling the distant echoes of human minds, the storm of emotions, the iron will, the terrible weight of doing something they hated because the alternative was worse. Because they decided that our lives are worth their pain, he finally said. They could walk away. They could have stayed peaceful and let us die. Instead, they're tearing open old wounds in their souls, killing parts of themselves that they spent centuries trying to heal. All because they couldn't stand by and watch us be destroyed. He looked at her with eyes full of something between grief and awe. That isn't violence, child. That's love. A terrible, costly, painful kind of love that we could never understand, but love nonetheless. Gentle Rain thought about this as the ship carried them toward safety. Behind them, the human fleet moved on, deeper into Vreth space, carrying that strange, fierce, agonized love with them, like a weapon in a wound. The war wasn't over yet, but for the first time since the genocide began, the Mirai had hope. Captain Maya Chen stood at the edge of the Vreth settlement, watching the survivors emerge from their shelters. 2 weeks ago, this had been a military colony, a supply depot for the Vreth forces carrying out the genocide. Now, with the war sweeping across the Dominion, it was just a place full of frightened people who had nowhere to run. The colonists came out slowly, their serpentine bodies coiled tight with fear. They expected to die. Maya could see it in their eyes, in the way they moved, in the quiet resignation that hung over them like a shroud. The Vreth had spent 1,000 years conquering other species. They knew exactly what conquerors did to the conquered. Captain, her sergeant said quietly, we've secured the administrative building. No weapons found. The local militia surrendered without a fight. Casualties? None. On either side. Maya nodded slowly. Around her, her soldiers stood watchful but calm. Their weapons were holstered. Their postures were non-threatening. They had trained for this, trained for the strange challenge of occupying territory without terrorizing the population. Set up a medical station, she ordered. Food distribution after that. I want the children fed first. The children, ma'am? The sergeant looked confused. They're Vreth children. They're children. Maya's voice was firm. They didn't decide to kill the Mirai. They didn't vote for the war. They're just kids who are hungry and scared because their world is falling apart. Feed them. She walked toward the crowd of Vreth colonists. They shrank back as she approached, their scales shifting to the gray-green color of terror. She stopped at a distance that she hoped felt non-threatening and waited. Eventually, an older breath, a female based on the pattern of her scales, gathered enough courage to approach. Her voice was a terrified whisper. "Are you here to kill us?" "No. To take us to camps? Like we did to the Mirai?" Maya felt something twist in her gut. "No, we're not like you." The Vreth female stared at her, confusion mixing with the fear in her eyes. "Then what do you want? Right now? I want to make sure your people have food and medical care. Tomorrow I want to start rebuilding basic services. After that." Maya paused, considering how to explain something that probably seemed impossible to someone raised in Vreth culture. "After that, I want to help your people figure out how to be something different than what you've been." "I don't understand." "I know. Most of you won't, not at first." Maya gestured for her medic to come forward. "For now, let's just start with food. We can figure out the rest later." Hundreds of light years away, Ambassador Yuki Tanaka was having a much more difficult conversation. The Vreth Empress had finally agreed to negotiate, but she had not agreed to anything else. She sat in her throne room, surrounded by guards who knew they were useless, projecting an image of arrogant defiance that everyone in the room knew was hollow. "You ask too much," the Empress hissed. "You want us to hand over our citizens to be judged by aliens. You want us to pay reparations that would bankrupt our economy. You want us to acknowledge that our entire civilization has been built on crimes? This is not negotiation. This is humiliation." Yuki remained calm. "It's accountability. There's a difference." "Accountability." The Empress spat the word. "You humans speak of accountability while your fleets burn through our territory. You speak of justice while you kill our soldiers. Where is your accountability?" "Our soldiers are dying too." Yuki's voice was quiet. "Every battle costs us. Every life we take costs us. We don't enjoy this, Empress. We never wanted this. But you left us no choice." "No choice?" The Empress laughed bitterly. "You could have stayed out of it. You could have let us finish what we started with the Mirai. They were nothing. A species of no significance, no power, no value. Why do you care what happens to them?" And there it was. The question that the Vreth would never understand, spoken out loud. Yuki stood slowly. She was a small woman, old and tired, and the Empress towered over her from her elevated throne. But somehow in that moment, it was the Empress who seemed diminished. "Because they are people," Yuki said, "because they have just as much right to exist as you do. Because what you did to them was wrong. Not wrong because it hurt your economy or damaged your reputation or made enemies of other powers. Wrong because it was wrong. Because causing that much suffering, destroying that many lives, cannot be justified by any calculation of profit or advantage." "You are naive," the Empress sneered. "The galaxy is cruel. The strong survive. The weak perish. This is the way things are." "No," Yuki shook her head. "That is the way things have been. That is the way your people have made them. But it doesn't have to be that way. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way. We spent thousands of years believing exactly what you believe. That might makes right. That the strong can do whatever they want to the weak. And then we nearly destroyed ourselves." She stepped closer to the throne. And the guards tensed but didn't move. They knew it was pointless. "We climbed out of that darkness," Yuki continued. "We chose to be better. Not because we were weak, because we realized that strength without compassion is just a slower form of suicide. And now we're offering you the same choice. You can keep believing that cruelty is the natural order of the universe. Or you can learn what we learned and become something better than what you are." The Empress was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, some of the arrogance had drained from her voice. "And if we refuse, then we continue until your military is completely destroyed. Then we occupy your territory and impose the changes ourselves. Then your people spend a generation learning to be different because they have no other choice, instead of because they chose to change." Yuki shrugged. "Either way, the genocide ends. Either way, there are consequences for what you've done. The only question is whether the Vreth as a civilization survived the process." Back on the occupied colony, Captain Maya Chen was dealing with a different kind of problem. Her medic, Lieutenant Foster, had just finished treating a young Vreth with a respiratory infection. The child, and despite the alien form, she was clearly a child, had clung to her mother's tail throughout the examination, eyes wide with terror. When Foster tried to give her a nutrient supplement, she flinched away as if expecting to be struck. "They think we're going to hurt them," Foster said quietly, watching the family hurry away. Every interaction, they're bracing for pain that never comes. It's like they can't process kindness. It doesn't fit their worldview. "They've never known anything else," Maya replied. "The Vreth conquered dozens of species over their history. They know exactly what conquerors do, because they've done it themselves. They're waiting for us to act like they would. And when we don't, that's when things get complicated." Maya watched the colonists move through the food distribution line. Human soldiers supervised, but they weren't armed with anything more than sidearms. Medical staff worked alongside Vreth volunteers. Children who had been terrified that morning were now cautiously accepting snacks and staring at the strange, soft-skinned aliens who had taken over their world. A transmission came through on her communicator. She stepped away to take it. "Captain Chen, this is General Webb." "General, how can I help you?" "I wanted to check in on your operation. I'm getting reports that your approach is unconventional." Maya tensed slightly. "Sir, I'm following the general guidelines for civilian management." "Easy, Captain. That wasn't a criticism." Webb's voice was tired but not unkind. "I've been looking at your metrics. Lowest civilian unrest of any occupied zone. Fastest restoration of basic services. Cooperation from local authorities that other sectors can only dream of. Whatever you're doing, it's working." "I'm treating them like people, sir. Scared, confused people who've been raised in a culture of violence and don't know how to function without it. But still people." There was a pause on the line. When Webb spoke again, his voice was softer. "I've got colonels screaming at me that we need to be harder. That the Vreth are monsters and we should treat them as such. That mercy is weakness." "What do you tell them, sir?" "I tell them that the Vreth treated the Mirai as monsters, and that's how we ended up in this war in the first place. I tell them that if we become what we're fighting against, then we've already lost, regardless of who wins the battles." Another pause. "And I tell them about what's happening in your sector. A little girl who was afraid of our medic this morning started waving at him this afternoon. That's what winning actually looks like." Maya felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you, sir." "No, Captain. Thank you for reminding all of us what we're supposed to be fighting for." That night, Maya sat outside her command tent, looking up at unfamiliar stars. The colony was quiet now. Curfew was in effect. But it was a gentle curfew, meant to keep people safe rather than to control them. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Vreth voices, probably a family, speaking in tones she couldn't understand but could recognize. Normal sounds, life going on. She pulled out a small photograph, her grandmother, taken decades ago, wearing a uniform much like Maya's own. The woman had been a peacekeeping soldier in the old days, before the peace accords, during the transition period when humanity was still learning to be what it would become. "Did we do the right thing, Grandma?" Maya whispered to the photo. "Coming back to this? Remembering how to fight?" There was no answer, of course, but looking at the quiet colony, at the people who had expected death and received food instead, Maya thought she could guess what her grandmother might have said. "Sometimes you have to fight. The important thing is not to lose yourself in the fighting." She put the photo away and went to check on her troops. The war was far from over, but something was beginning to change. In the Vreth, in the humans, in the very fabric of how things worked in this part of the galaxy. And maybe, just maybe, it was changing for the better. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a choice. The Vreth Empress stood in the great hall of her palace, surrounded by the remnants of her court. Outside, human ships filled the sky. Her fleets were destroyed. Her armies were scattered. Her empire, built over 1,000 years of conquest, lay in ruins. And still the humans offered terms. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood before her, patient as always, waiting. She had been waiting for 6 weeks, through negotiations that had collapsed and resumed a dozen times. She had been waiting even longer, really. Waiting since the day humanity declared war. waiting for this moment when the Vreth would finally understand. "I don't know how to accept this," the Empress said finally, and for the first time, her voice held something other than arrogance or defiance. It held confusion, genuine and raw. "You've beaten us, utterly. You could take everything we have. You could exterminate us like we tried to exterminate the Mirai, and instead you offer this." She gestured at the treaty document that floated between them in holographic form. "Accountability for war crimes, yes. Reparations to the Mirai, yes. Restructuring of Vreth society, yes. But also investment, education, aid, a path toward something different." "Why?" the Empress asked. "Why would you help the people who forced you to become killers again?" Yuki considered the question for a long moment. It was, she knew, the most important question anyone had asked her in this entire war. "Because we know what it costs to be what you are," she finally said. "We were like you once, conquerors, predators. We built empires on the blood of our enemies and called it glory. And then we learned the truth, that every life we took diminished us, that every cruelty we committed poisoned our souls, that the more we conquered, the more we lost." She moved closer to the throne, her small form somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the vast room. "We could destroy you. We have the power. And there are people, good people, people who watched the Mirai die, people who fought your soldiers and lost friends in the fighting, who would say we should, that you deserve it, that the galaxy would be safer without the Vreth in it." The Empress flinched, waiting for the blow. "But that's the trap, isn't it?" Yuki continued. "That's the poison that nearly killed us. If we exterminate you, we become you. If we rule you through fear and force, we become you. The only way to truly defeat what you represent is to prove there's a better way. And if we don't change, if we pretend to accept your terms and then go back to what we were the moment your ships leave, then we'll come back." Yuki's voice was calm but final. "And we'll keep coming back, as many times as it takes, until you understand that the old ways don't work anymore. But we'd rather you learn willingly. We'd rather help you become what you could be instead of forcing you to pretend." The Empress was silent for a long time. Her court waited, barely breathing. "The Morai," she finally said, "the ones we didn't kill, what do they want?" This was the question Yuki had been hoping for. "They want to go home. They want to rebuild. They want to raise their children without fear." She paused. "They want justice, not revenge. They're not capable of that. But acknowledgement, truth, understanding of what was done to them and why it was wrong. They don't want us dead? No. They can feel emotions, Empress. They could feel the hatred and cruelty in your soldiers as they killed. But they could also feel the shame and regret in the Vreth, who didn't want to participate, who were forced by their culture to go along with the genocide. They know that not all of you are monsters. They want the monsters held accountable, but they don't want to become monsters themselves in the process." The Empress closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Something old and hard was cracking, allowing something new to emerge. "My grandmother conquered 3 species," she said quietly. "My mother conquered 2 more. I was raised to believe that this was our purpose, to take what we wanted because we were strong enough to take it. I never questioned it. I never imagined there could be any other way." "There's always another way," Yuki said gently. "That's what we learned. That's what we're trying to teach you. And you really believe we can change? After everything we've done?" "I believe anyone can change, Empress. Humanity did. It took us centuries. And we made terrible mistakes along the way. But we did it. If we could transform from what we were to what we are now, then so can you." The Empress looked at the treaty again, at the terms that would dismantle everything her people had built, everything they had believed in, everything they had been, at the path towards something utterly unknown. She reached out and placed her hand on the signature plate. "Then let's begin," she said. 1 year later, gentle rain stood on the surface of her homeworld for the first time since the genocide began. The planet was scarred. Cities lay in ruins. Great swaths of forest had been burned by Vreth soldiers as they hunted survivors. The camps where millions of Morai had died still stood, preserved now as memorials rather than erased as if they had never existed. But among the scars, there were signs of life. Reconstruction crews, human, Morai, and even Vreth worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. Gardens bloomed in the ashes of burned homes. Schools taught children who had been born in refugee ships and never seen their ancestral sky. And walking beside her, awkward and uncertain but genuinely trying, was a Vreth female named Sareth. Sareth had been a camp administrator. She had overseen the deaths of thousands of Morai. Under the old order, she would have been rewarded for her efficiency. Under the new order, she had been convicted of war crimes and sentenced, not to death, but to service. 20 years of helping to rebuild what she had destroyed. She was not the only one. Thousands of Vreth worked throughout Morai space, repaying their debt in the only currency that mattered: effort, time, in the slow, painful process of understanding what they had done. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sarah said quietly as they walked through what had been a mass grave, now transformed into a memorial garden. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not sure I'll ever understand why you allowed this. Allowed me to be here, to help instead of just killing me." Gentle Rain was quiet for a moment, feeling Sareth's emotions with the same clarity she felt everything: shame, grief, a desperate longing for something she couldn't name, and beneath it all, the faint, flickering beginning of genuine change. "Because killing you wouldn't bring them back," Gentle Rain finally said. "Because watching you suffer wouldn't heal us. And because," she paused, searching for the right words, "because the humans showed us something. They came here with all that strength, all that power, and they used it to protect instead of destroy. They could have wiped out your species. They chose not to. They chose to believe that you could be better." She looked at Sareth with her large dark eyes. "If they could believe that after everything they witnessed, how could we believe any less?" Far across the galaxy, in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, High Counselor Vareth of the Tarathi rose to address the assembled delegates. "5 years ago," he began, "humanity declared war for the first time in 3 centuries. Many of us believed it meant the end of the galaxy as we knew it. We were right, but not in the way we expected." The chamber was different now. New species had joined, species that had been too weak or too afraid under the old order. Old powers had accepted new limitations on their behavior, and sitting in a section that had been empty for 1,000 years, a small delegation of Vreth listened quietly, learning their place in a new galactic order. "Humanity showed us something during that war," Vareth continued. "They showed us that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty, that victory doesn't have to mean destruction, that you can fight to protect without becoming the very thing you fight against." He looked around the chamber, at the representatives of hundreds of species, all of them watching, listening. "Some of us thought humanity was weak because they chose peace. We were wrong. They were stronger than any of us. Strong enough to hold back. Strong enough to wait. Strong enough to maintain their principles even when they finally took up arms. And that strength has transformed the galaxy more than any conquest ever could." In a quiet garden on Earth, General Marcus Webb sat on a bench, watching his grandchildren play. He had retired after the war, his duty finally complete. The hidden military infrastructure was being maintained by a new generation now, ready if needed, hopefully never to be used again. A message chimed on his personal device. He checked it and smiled slightly. It was from Captain Maya Chen. She was a colonel now, heading up the integration program that worked with Vreth communities throughout former Dominion space. She reported that another former military colony had reached full self-governance, that the children who had cowered from human medics now attended schools with human teachers, that a Vreth family had invited her to dinner and spent the entire evening asking questions about Earth. He put the device away and watched his grandchildren run through the grass, laughing in the sunshine. This was what they had fought for. Not territory, not dominance, not revenge. Just this, the simple, precious possibility of children playing in a peaceful world, of old enemies becoming new friends, of a galaxy that was slowly, painfully, learning to be better than it had been. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, now retired and living quietly on a small island on Earth, often thought about the Vreth Empress's question: why had humanity helped instead of destroyed? Why had they chosen mercy over justice, transformation over punishment? The answer, she knew, was simple. It was the same reason they had spent 3 centuries being peacemakers. The same reason they had kept their war capacity hidden but ready. The same reason they had finally gone to war when every other option had failed. Because humanity had learned through bitter experience that there was no real victory in destruction, that the only true triumph was building something that lasted, something better than what had come before, that the purpose of strength was not to crush the weak, but to protect them, to shelter them, to give them the chance to become strong themselves. The Vreth were learning that lesson now, slowly and painfully, the same way humanity had learned it centuries ago. And in learning it, they were becoming something new, not conquerors, not victims, but partners in a galaxy that was finally beginning to understand what peace really meant. Not the absence of war, but the presence of something worth protecting. On a rebuilt Mirai homeworld, a Vreth child and a Mirai child played together in a garden that had once been a mass grave. They didn't know the history of the ground beneath their feet. They didn't know about the war or the genocide or the long, hard road of transformation. They only knew that they were friends, that the sun was warm, and that the adults around them, human and Vreth and Mirai alike, were smiling. And watching them, Gentle Rain understood at last what the humans had really given her people. Not just survival, not just justice, not even just peace. Hope.